Before filling stages, there was a young man with doubts, dreams, and an idea that seemed impossible. Because the story of Peso Pluma doesn't begin with fame. It begins with a search. Welcome to Behind the Fame, where you'll discover the lives of your favorite artists before they were famous and understand the story that led them to become who they are today. This is Behind the Fame. His real name is Hassan Emilio Cabandelija. He was born in Guadalajara, Mexico, in a city where music has always been present, but where standing out is not easy. Since he was young, Hassan lived between two worlds. On one hand, the Mexican culture that surrounded him. On the other hand, the foreign influences that were beginning to shape their identity. He didn't grow up under a classic narrative of regional Mexican music. He didn't come from a family tradition of mariachi or band. His approach to music was more modern, more hybrid, more intuitive. Like many young people, his adolescence was full of questions. Who am I? Where do I belong? What do I do with everything I feel? And in that emotional chaos, music appeared. Not as a goal, but as a tool. Hassan didn't start with extensive studies. He didn't have a defined artistic structure. What he had was curiosity. He learned to play the guitar by watching tutorials, listening, repeating, failing, trying again. Alike was not yet a professional path. It was a way to express oneself, a way to organize thoughts, to understand relationships, of processing emotions. And without realizing it, they began to write. His first letters were not commercial. They weren't made for the algorithm. They were personal, stories, moments, experiences, fragments of life. The stage name came later. Peso Pluma did not originate as a marketing strategy. It was born as an identity, a way to represent lightness in the midst of a heavy environment, a duality, fragility within a harsh world. At that moment, Hassan still didn't know he was stepping into a scene that would soon change Latin music. Because while he was learning, something else was happening. A new sound was being born. A sound that mixed tradition with modernity. Corridos, but different. Closer to trap. Closer to hip-hop. Closer to the emotional reality of young people. And Peso Pluma fit right in. Not because I was looking for it, but because his style was already different. His raspy voice. His way of phrasing. His unpretentious attitude.
Me levanto un baño y luego me pongo a jugar. Es veneno da para arriba y de mi buena calidad.
Everything felt authentic. His first song started to circulate. I don't eat immediate successes, but rather as discoveries. From mouth to mouth, from playlist to playlist, people who said, listen to this, it sounds different. And in an industry where many try to fit in, Peso Pluma didn't do it. He didn't try to sound traditional. He didn't try to copy formulas. He simply sang as it came to him. And that was enough, so that people began to notice. What began as experimentation soon turned into direction. And what seemed like just another attempt of making music, it became the beginning of something much bigger, because the next step would not be growth. It would be an exhibition. Peso Pluma was about to stop being just an emerging name to become a voice that was starting to attract attention. In the next part, we will see how Peso Pluma went from being a new proposal to become a key figure in the new Mexican sound, and how his rise began to gain momentum.
Miren quién lo pensaría, el muchacho se fue para arriba.
The rise of Peso Pluma was not immediate. There wasn't an exact moment when everything exploded all at once. Rather, it was like a wave that gradually builds up until you can no longer ignore it. His first songs began to have something in common. People kept coming back to listen to them. They were not mere reproductions. They were connections. His vocal style, upon that raspy voice that seemed to break without breaking, began to distinguish him within a movement that was already growing. While the corridos tumbados gained momentum, Peso Pluma moved within that new scene, without trying to be the center. But little by little, his name appeared more and more. In recommendations, in collaborations, in conversations. The key was in his authenticity. I wasn't trying to sound perfect. I wasn't looking for a polished image. His way of singing had imperfections, and that's where his strength lay. Because those imperfections, they made him human. The young audience began to identify something different. Peso Pluma wasn't singing from a distance. He was singing from the inside. Desde la experiencia, from the emotion. And that started to attract attention. At this stage, the collaborations arrive. And with them, the exhibition. Working with other artists from the new movement, it puts him in front of larger audiences. Not as a protagonist yet, but as someone who is starting to stand out. His songs are starting to travel. Mexico, United States, and little by little, other countries. Digital platforms do their job. The algorithm does not create the phenomenon, but it amplifies it. And then something important happens. People don't just listen to Peso Pluma, start to recognize it. His name stops being a discovery and begins to be a reference. But growth also brings pressure. Now there are expectations. Now there are glances. Now there's a comparison. And the challenge is no longer just creating music. It's staying true while the external noise grows. Peso Pluma continues to bet on the same thing. Not change its essence. Don't soften your style. Don't abandon that rawness that made him stand out. His music begins to reflect something more than just stories. It starts to represent a generation. A generation that lives between tradition and modernity, between cultural pride and new influences. The corrido is no longer just a story. Now it is also identity. Peso Pluma becomes part of that new language. His presence is growing on stages. It's no longer just digital. Now there are concerts, audiences, people singing their lyrics. And with each presentation, the connection becomes more evident. Peso Pluma is no longer just a promise. He becomes someone who starts to weigh heavily, someone who is no longer joining the conversation, but participating in it. But what comes next? It won't just be growth. It will be impactful. A moment when his name will stop rising, to become a global trend. Because the next step, it won't just be about consolidating. It will explode. Success came, but with it, the consequences also arrived. Because when you climb too fast, the world begins to observe each of your steps. And that was exactly what started happening with Peso Pluma. It was no longer just music. Now it was controversy. While their music dominated platforms, a conversation began to grow. What was his music representing? Some saw him as an innovative artist, but others, like someone who romanticized dangerous realities. Suddenly, the name Peso Pluma was no longer just on the charts. I was in national debates. His style, his lyrics, his image, everything was being questioned. And with that, the pressure started to increase. The world embraced him. But the same world, he was also examining it. Being the face of a new musical wave means something. You can no longer hide. Everything you do is magnified. Every decision, each friendship, every word. And while her career was growing, his personal life was starting to be scrutinized closely. Fame doesn't just illuminate, also invades. Rumors about relationships, friendships, circle changes. Everything turned into content. Suddenly, Hassan was no longer just an artist. He was a media personality. And the audience? I wanted to know everything. Being an idol doesn't mean being invincible. It means carrying expectations. And those expectations, they can become tedious. Because the same audience that elevates you can also judge you. The question now was no longer, can it succeed? The question was, can you hold it? Peso Pluma was at the peak of his career, but also at the most vulnerable point. Because when you become a symbol, you stop being just you. You become a trend in debate, in influence. And that, it can change everything. Fame had taken him to the top. But now, the question was different. Not if I could make it, but if he could stay. Because the hardest part of success, it's not about getting it. It's about surviving it.
Las ganas de superarme por las noches me perturban.
The summit can be brilliant, but also fragile. And when you're at the top, any movement can turn into an earthquake. The conversation around Peso Pluma has stopped being just musical. Now it was social, cultural, even politics. His impact was so great that could no longer be ignored. Success also brings risks, canceled events, presentations under pressure, expectation mixed with uncertainty. Suddenly, the narrative changed. They were no longer just talking about his records, but of its context. His figure became a symbol of something greater than music. The question began to arise. Is he just a singer? Or is it the reflection of a generation? Because their story, it's not just about songs, it's about identity, about aspiration, about how young people see success today. His music connected because it didn't seem perfect. It seemed real. Regardless of the controversy, something is undeniable. Open doors. It inspired a new wave. He changed the sound of the mainstream. What used to be regional, now it is global. What used to be local, now fills international arenas. And that, it's already part of history. But behind the phenomenon, there is still a person. Someone who started with dreams, with doubts, hungry to grow. Someone who never imagined become a symbol. Because success does not eliminate humanity. She exposes it. The story of Peso Pluma is not perfect. And maybe that's why it connects. It's a story of ascent, of ambition, of controversy, impactful. A reminder that modern success, it's not silent. It's noisy, contradictory, and deeply human. Because in the end, the question is not whether your story is already written. Otherwise, how she will be remembered. If you want to learn more stories about the artists you admire, this channel is for you. Here you will discover their journey, their struggles, and their true essence. Meet your favorite celebrity and fall even more in love with their story, their talent, and their greatness. Comment on which other celebrity you would like to see on this channel open-molded, and we will bring their story so you can get to know it and enjoy it. Because behind every star, there is a story that deserves to be told. This was Behind the Fame. See you next time.